Hi, thank you for joining me today. We're talking about a very somber topic. We're talking about financial considerations that you need to consider if your spouse passes. If you're here and you've just experienced the passing of a spouse, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for your loss, and I know you hear that from everybody. I'm here to help you think about areas of financial concerns that it's important for you to consider and review as you go through this time. Without further ado, my name is Dee Dee Jones. You've joined us here at Money Mastery with Dee Dee, answering your financial questions. Let's start with cash flow issues. If you are newly widowed or widowered, if that's a word, your cash flow is likely to be different. And in all probability, it's going to be important for you to understand how that has changed. You may have more assets or fewer. You might have more income or less. Sit down and make a budget, work with a financial advisor, and understand what those changes are so that you can move forward confidently knowing what's going on. Some things that relate to that are maybe Social Security. If your spouse was already receiving Social Security, it's important to learn about your eligibility for widower's benefits. If they were receiving a government pension that was based on earnings that were not subject to Social Security taxes, you may be eligible for a portion of that, but there are some potential offsets. We've got a video covering government pension offsets separately, so look for that if you fall into that category. If your spouse had reached their required minimum beginning date for required minimum distributions, you're going to, in the year 2020, just for the record, we're recording this October 2020, and so life is pretty much in upheaval. This year, there are no required minimum distributions, so you don't need to take any action. But starting next year, with what we know now, we expect that you will need to do that then. So you get a bit of a pass if we're talking the year 2020. If your spouse was receiving a pension, the payments may stop or actually be adjusted for survivor benefits. Definitely reach out to the pension provider. There's estate-related issues. They go much beyond what we'll talk about today, but let's hit the basics here. Are there any accounts that require the ownership of the account to be updated? Could be things that were held jointly. They're going to automatically pass to you, but you're going to need to contact the institution with a death certificate and say, all right, this was held jointly. Here's the death certificate. Change the ownership to my name only. That kind of thing. Did your spouse pass without a will? If that's the case, you're going to need to learn about your state's intestate laws to find out who will be in charge of the estate, what the court process is going to be, and exactly how the rules in your state govern inheritance, and it differs state to state. If you have more assets than you need to maintain your lifestyle, then you might want to look at contingent beneficiaries and allow some assets to pass on to them. This must happen, though, within 9 months of the date of death. So something to consider, contingent beneficiaries. Here's one that won't affect a whole lot of people, but if you're one of these, it's absolutely critical. If your spouse's estate exceeds $11,580,000 or your combined estate exceeds $23,160,000, you may have a federal tax liability. Get to a CPA and get some help with this. It's going to be complicated. Remember that proceeds from a life insurance policy owned by the deceased and values of the retirement accounts are included in that gross estate. To maintain the portability of your unused exemptions, you must file with the IRS the Form 706, and normally it's due 9 months from the date of death. With a 6-month extension, it's available. But if the 706 is filed only to elect the portability, it's due within 2 years of the date of death. So you've got a little bit of cushion there. If there's an estate tax liability and the total value of this estate at date of death, you're going to want to compare the value at date of death and 6 months after, because you have the choice on that 706 to elect an alternative valuation date or the actual date of death. Again, this is where it's going to be really critical to work with an attorney and or an accountant to get that taken care of. And finally, this is an interesting area. Are there property and assets that you haven't yet identified? So you could have points on a card that you could use for miles, like air travel right this minute probably isn't that high on your list of things to do, but it's definitely an asset. Check for safety deposit boxes and make sure that you know what's in them. Follow the probate rules before you open them. And then search state agencies and unclaimed property sites run by state agencies and other entities to see if there's any accounts hanging out there. I know I hopped on one once, and sure enough, I had like a $5 rebate check that I didn't cash some number of years ago. And with this debt, you might want to revisit your own estate plan. It depends on how things have changed for you, but it's definitely a good time to review it and decide if it needs updating. Another new area that we need to all consider, digital assets. Are there digital assets that need to be preserved? There are memorial Facebook pages. There are photos that are saved. There are books and assets purchased through Amazon that law is still up in the air a bit. But get access to the deceased's accounts and computer and see what's there. Let's talk a little bit about insurance. Was your spouse employed at the time of death? Because if so, their employer or union might actually have some group life insurance or compensation related to the employment. And if your spouse was a veteran, there may be some death and burial benefits available to you as the survivor, as well as survivor pension and other benefits. Definitely look into that. So if the death was accidental or work-related, check the life insurance. Sometimes it's a higher payout in the case of an accident. There might be employer or union benefits related to an accident. Some professional associations offer small lump sum benefits in the case of an accident. And there might even be workers' compensation or death benefits related to this. And also related to insurance, know that there might be life insurance that you haven't yet identified. And there's a site, NAIC Life Insurance Association, where you can look for life insurance policies. And anybody can go look there. Really powerful tool to find unclaimed life insurance policies. And if you happen to have a child under age 18 or a child that's permanently disabled, you and maybe the child will be eligible for Social Security benefits. How about some tax issues? We've touched on a couple, and I mentioned before, we're talking in October of 2020. So we know what the tax rules are through the end of the year. The year's chaotic. Every likelihood under the sun that this is going to be changed within the next year. But for now, let's talk about this. So homeownership. Currently, if a married couple sells their home, the first $500,000 of gain is exempt from taxation. As a widow, you have an additional 2 years to take advantage of that if you sell your home. After 2 years, that exemption drops to half that amount of $250,000. So it depends on how much value is built up in your home and if selling your home makes sense right now. Additionally, if you've got property that you own jointly with your spouse, you need to record the new basis. When someone dies, the value at death as it passes to someone else is reset to the value at the date of death. That's stepped up basis. Real important to keep track of, especially if it's something you're going to own for a while, can really save you in taxes down the road. It's important to make sure that the spouse's tax obligations are taken care of. As the representative of the estate, you're on the hook for it if you don't. So do check with the IRS, the state's taxing authority, pay any taxes, and check and see if any back taxes are due. If you've been filing as married filing jointly, you can continue to do so in the year of your spouse's death. Now, if you have a dependent child, the tax filing status for the 2 years following the death can be qualifying widow, widower, and that has a significant tax advantage in a higher standard deduction. So look at that. When we talk about investments and assets, it can get pretty complicated. It depends on what was in your world. Did your spouse have stock options, grants, or restricted stock units? And if so, get more information so that you can work with your accountant or advisor to understand how these investments will affect your tax liability and your cash flow planning. They're complicated critters. And now that your situation has changed, do you want to revisit your investment objectives and maybe even risk tolerance? Your changing financial situation can strongly influence both of those. If your spouse owned a business, are you in the middle of transferring and selling the business? If so, for sure, bring in an expert to help you make that transition safe and financially beneficial to you. And there may be other illiquid assets that you're dealing with, such as an annuity. Before you make choices on those, be sure you get educated about what the investment is and what all of your choices are and what the implications of those choices mean for you. And finally, a couple of oddball that don't fit cleanly in any category. It's sad but true that death notices create fraud. That the fraudsters will start contacting the surviving spouse and claim money was due, or they will just steal the deceased spouse information and do what they do with stolen identities, buy in that person's name, get credit cards, etc. So really important, as quickly as you can, to cancel email accounts, social media accounts, notify credit bureaus, cancel driver's licenses, and notify the election board. And depending on where you live, there may be state-specific issues that need to be considered. This is, again, where an attorney or a CPA can help you out and look at your situation and make sure that you understand what you have and what your obligations are. Again, I'm sorry for your loss that you're here finding this information, but hopefully this has helped you understand the range of topics that are important for you to consider when your spouse passes. If you need more help with this or anything financial, we are here to help you. Again, this is Dee Dee Jones with Innovative Financial. Thank you for joining us today.